Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for your interest in panel 1, the New World Order of Finance. And our subtitle is How Geopolitics, Regulation and Tech are Reshaping Financial Services, turning tax into a tool of economic power amid politicized uneven taxation. I'm very happy to be able to welcome, my name is Stefan Gnutzmann of WTS from Germany, I'm the moderator, and I'm very happy to be able to introduce to you, just briefly, Karina Robinson, Sir Edward Troop, and Gerard Lyons, and Miss Angela Knight. Thank you very much for joining our stage and giving us a few insights on the following topic. You will introduce yourselves quickly in a minute. Can we just see the next slide, please? No, we cannot. Then, please. Ms. Robinson, would you like to say a few introductory words?
Absolutely. So hello, I'm Karina Robinson. I sit at the intersection of defense, finance, and quantum. I sit on the board of a Swiss asset manager. I'm the founder of the City Quantum and AI Summit at the Mansion House, and I help brainstorm NATO's quantum strategy. So the question is, why am I here? And I'm here because Ali said I should come here, and one always does what Ali says. Let me give you a few thoughts on the new, and it was saying world order. There is no new world order. There's only a new world disorder. So I'm going to give you 3 recent quotes from 3 influential people that encapsulate where we are. Ursula von der Leyen of the European Commission. Her quote is, "We cannot allow ourselves to once again fall for the fallacy that the storm will pass, that things will go back to how they were before. If only the war would end, or a tariff deal be struck, or the next elections have a different outcome. No, they will not." What you can take from that is that uncertainty rules, and it's going to continue to rule. We're not going through a bit of an alteration and then a new world order will arise. Uncertainty will continue to rule. Secondly, our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, his quote is, "The question is how do we grow the economy and create wealth? I don't think you can tax your way to growth. We have high tax as it is." Growth is key, and the intersection between creating more growth and tax and the needs of indebted governments all over the world is going to be where the sweet spot might be for this new, larger, more ambitious firm. So growth is key. The third one is Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager. His quote, which was in the FT yesterday, "Under globalization, money often chases returns around the world without necessarily benefiting the people back home. Countries can steer more of that capital home. In a more nationally attuned model, markets channel citizen savings into local businesses and infrastructures. Capital is local." That's the third conclusion. And I think it's rather interesting that Larry Fink, global, the epitome of globalization, has realized this. I think we're at the turning point of where tax becomes much more focused on incentivizing local opportunities for growth amid an ever more uncertain world where the tax rules of a country like the US become changeable from one day to the next. Minou Shafik, who was she was the president of Columbia University, governor of the LSE, She was at the IMF. She said in a study she did probably about 2 years ago, for FDI, what is the most important factor? And it's not the political color of the government. What it is, of a government in any country you're going to invest in, what it is stability. And I think any country that can give some sort of stability in its regulation, in its tax, will have an incredible advantage. Now, my conclusion from all of this is that this is the end of the free flow of capital. And the news today in the UK, but this could be applicable anywhere else, there is legislation that has just been presented to Parliament, and it gives the Chancellor the right to start telling pension funds, the power, which can be used or not used, to start telling them to invest in their home country. There was something called the Mansion House Accords in the UK, where basically pension funds and asset managers, 17 of the largest ones in this country, were told, and they agreed voluntarily, but I don't know how voluntary it was, that they would invest at least 5% of their assets in the UK. I think this is only the beginning. Capital is going to become more and more local. Will we have capital controls again in the developed world? I'm not sure. It now seems absurd, but they did exist. So if it's the end of the free flow of capital, or perhaps better said, the beginning of the end, you as tax advisors or as companies facing the uncertainty in tax are going to have to deal with all of it. And I think WTS Hansuka, who very kindly invited me here, it's a good place for them to start figuring out how to advise you better, and especially how to use AI, because that is definitely, it's going to be a great help. And any firm that uses technology will have a great advantage. How to use quantum, because quantum computers will be here sooner rather than later. And they have the possibility of looking at a lot of scenarios at the same time. But more than anything else, I think, Ali mentioned the word trust. And I think creating trust is something that the firm should stick to, because with that, they have an extra advantage over all their competitors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Robinson, for those pronounced ideas. The beginning of the end of the free flow of capital. Sir Edward, your take on these?
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you to Ali and colleagues for the invitation. I'm Edward Troop. I spent half of my career as a corporate tax lawyer in a law firm advising businesses, and I spent the other half in the public sector, first at the Treasury, where I ran the tax teams and produced budgets, mainly for Gordon Brown, but also for George Osborne, and then at HMRC, where I held a senior role and ended up as executive chair. So apart from not ever being a client, I think I've worked on every single side of tax that there is. Karina, I agree with much of what Karina said. I also disagree with a couple of things, which it's good because we can have a good debate. I actually started my career about 2 months before capital controls in this country were abolished, so exchange controls. So, these things do come round. And Stefan did not manage to get his slide up, but what it showed, if I may steal your little bit of thunder, was that for about 50 years in the last century, the top income tax rate in the United States was over 70%, and I think for 20 years it was over 90%. And those are extraordinary numbers, and it does remind you that the world can change. And so although this is a time of disorder, I have a little bit more confidence that some sort of order will emerge, even if it's a very new order. Anyway, I have now about 4 minutes left to make some comments about tax. And one of the things I disagree with Karina on is what tax is about. Tax is about money, and it is about politics. People try and make it about other things, but that is what it's about. It's about money, particularly now, because the demand for public services outstrips the willingness or ability of governments to raise money. And it's about politics, I mean, not just for the obvious reason, but also the more subtle point that the world of politics has changed with everything else. And the days of the big principal budgets of the likes of Nigel Lawson and to a lesser extent Gordon Brown have gone. And all chancellors can do, as we have seen and continue to see, is they can do little things, all of which makes the world of tax more complex. So what actually, I'll say a little bit about national and international, and then I'll say a little bit about the future. Where are we nationally, and where are we likely to be? Well, first of all, for the reasons I've just given, we're going to see more micro policies, we're going to see more complexity, we're undoubtedly seeing more uncertainty. And those of you who wish for a single, broad, simpler tax system, just give up. It isn't going to happen because the politics in the world are against us. Internationally, we are in an era both of disorder and of deglobalization. And that means that those big multinational, multilateral initiatives like the OECD Pillar 1, Pillar 2 are firmly dead. Although when I was at the Treasury and HMRC, I led the UK's participation in these, I was never a true believer because I could see that even under democratic presidents, the US was never going to wholeheartedly sign up. And what Trump has done is accelerated a process which was already well underway, which was the US backing off these multilateral initiatives. So I think echoing some of the points already made, we are moving to a more nationalistic era of taxation. That's not necessarily a bad thing if you're working in tax, because it takes away an additional layer. You've got to deal with all these national tax systems, but at least you don't have to deal with these people, in the OECD who, as we've seen in the UK's attempt to translate the pillars into UK legislation, just make things incredibly complicated. So what can we expect? And I am watching my clock because I'm determined not to take longer than Karina. We can expect continuing complexity. Angela did a great job as the chair of the Office of Tax Simplification, but I think even she would admit that progress was limited. We can expect continuing complexity. We can expect continuing uncertainty. I mean, that's always been the case in tax. And I think we can expect opportunism, political opportunism, in just fiddling around with the tax system, grabbing a bit of money if it's there to be grabbed, taking the opportunities. Now, what does that mean for the financial sector? Well, as I said about the banks, you rob them because that's where the money is. You rob the financial services, sorry, I don't want to use the word rob, I've got into trouble with this in the past. You tax the financial services sector, or at least you look at them as a conduit for taxation, because that is where the money is. And so you are going to continue to be at the heart of taxation. You're never going to be politically popular unless there is a real change in the world order, and so you're going to find yourself subjected. We've got the DST, which hasn't quite got to you yet, but it will do. The financial sector, is the banking levy, and I'm sorry, I'm not up to date with everything these days, but there are a range of taxes which the financial sector are subject to. I think more positively, if I had a vision when I was at HMRC for the tax system, it was that it could become, at least for individuals, like a gas bill. Individuals didn't have to do anything. Effectively, HMRC read the meter and took the payment. Now, there are all sort of political debates about whether that's a sensible way of operating a tax system, but from a tax administrator's perspective, it was a great vision. And I think if there is anything like that, and clearly the opportunities given by development of data and technology do give us that chance, the financial sector, through whom all money flows, will be at the heart of modernizing the administration of the tax system. So I'm probably out of time. There is going to be more work for you. There is going to be more uncertainty. There is more opportunity. I haven't mentioned AI. If you're a professional, I think this is a fantastically transformative thing. I don't have any professional support myself. I do everything, and I use AI to validate what I think I'm supposed to be doing with my tax returns and everything else. It does work. And I would say, finally, about the future of the tax system. Ignore the idealists who think that the tax system can make the world better. It doesn't. It makes it worse. It must focus on collecting more money and doing it efficiently. And I'm sorry, it's not going to be about incentivizing growth. It's not going to be about net zero. And also ignore the rationalists who say, if you could just do this, the tax system would be wonderful. It's never going to be like that. We are dealing with humanity. We're dealing with the messiness and the crooked timber of human beings. And that's going to give you a living. And it's going to give me something to talk about the tax system for the next 20 years.
Thank you very much, Sir Edward. The crooked timber of tax law and humans renationalization. Dr. Lyons, your take on the future, because that's what we want to focus on, the new world order in your view.
Thank you. Good morning. Great pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm an economist. Just by way of introduction, I do a portfolio of roles. Here in the city, I've got 3 roles. One, I'm on the board of banking. Sorry, is the microphone not
I don't think this mic is on.
I can hear you.
Hello?
We can hear you though.
Can you hear
Can
him?
you hear me at the back? Good. Okay. I'll project. So I'm an economist. You'll be pleased to hear, in case you didn't hear that before. Okay. Very good. I can say for the 3rd time I'm an economist. Okay. I do 3 roles here in the city. I'm on the board of Bank of China, where I'm the SID, the Senior Independent Director. I'm on the board of BGC, which is part of the Cantor Fitzgerald Group, and I chair the Risk Committee. And at Net Wealth, we manage pensions and savings and ISAs. We've got about £1.3 billion under management. We started it 7 years ago. So I'm the strategist as well as a shareholder there. So I look at the financial sector and implicitly tax from different angles. What I'd like to do is to build on what's already been said by focusing on 3 areas. One, the economic aspect in terms of the changing global picture. Second, economic policy and tax. And third, how tax links into the financial sector. In terms of the world economy, Karina mentioned the uncertainty, but effectively what we're seeing is globalization is now being replaced by fragmentation. Free markets are being replaced by protectionism. And national security is now center stage alongside economic prosperity in terms of policy making in the West. Whether this leads to a bipolar world between America and China or a multipolar world remains to be seen. I think it's more a multipolar world and a more complex situation. I say that because in geopolitical terms, we now have a G3. Group 1 is America and its allies. Group 2, China and its partners. And Group 3 is what I would call the middle ground powers. Some people call them the global south, the likes of India, Nigeria, Brazil, big players. They don't want to be in America or China's back pockets, but they will play an increasingly important role in terms of global financial as well as economic infrastructure. And also in terms of the multipolar world, we are seeing a shift in the balance of economic power. Unfortunately, Western Europe is going to be the slow growth region of the world. The growth is going to be in the Indo-Pacific. Turn the atlas around, India on the left, America on the right. And that's where the growth is. What does it mean in terms of the economic policy levers? Monetary policy has not really produced the goods. Central banks have really been pretty appalling in terms of their policy actions in the last decade. Cheap money has contributed to inflation. Fiscal policy doesn't have much room for maneuver. Global debt levels are at an all-time high. What it means is that on the left, building on the points being made about the politics, we're seeing a move towards industrial policies and intervention, and tax is seen as playing a role there. On the right, if I can call it that, the free market space, the pressure and emphasis is on supply side measures. There, tax also plays a role, but as an incentive. President Trump has led to resets in terms of migration and energy at home and in terms of defense and trade overseas. But what we are now seeing, particularly as AI comes to the fore, is that tax is seen as a policy tool, and more people and more countries will use it. That leads into the second point about how does economics and policy and tax come together. You'll be pleased to hear economists have analysed this in detail. Adam Smith came up a couple of 100 years ago with the 4 canons of taxation: fairness, certainty, convenience, and efficiency. And that often is where economists begin from and where policymakers come in. But over time, as has been touched on, it's evolved. Tax has a revenue-raising role. It has an interventionist role. It's now seen as having a competitive role, and it's seen as clearly playing an incentive in terms of how companies and people behave. It certainly has become less simple and more complex. If you look at what this means, well, the tariff debate has already shown a big issue as to where the incidence of that tax falls. That remains to be seen. But if we take it at an OECD level, across the OECD, which is all the wealthy, industrialized Western countries, tax as a proportion of national income varies from 17% to 47%. Here in Western Europe, we tend to use our terms of reference as other Western European countries. This is the high tax region of the world. I would argue it's no coincidence, it's the slow growth region as well. Asian countries are much lower tax. But generally speaking, across the OECD, half of tax comes from income and social security. A quarter of tax comes from VAT. And of the other quarter, it's roughly split 10% of that quarter, or 10% of that 25% is other consumption taxes, 10% is corporation tax, and only 6% is property tax. If tax becomes a competitive tool, then we're likely to see a shift from taxing mobile areas to taxing immobile areas. And that's the real challenge. Here in the UK, to conclude the second part, we have a big debt problem. But actually the good news is that there's 5 of the other G7 countries are in a worse position than us. When it comes to debt, there are 6 options. Let's rule one out, which is inflate the debt away. That leaves governments facing 5 choices, or 5 options: grow, reform, austerity, tax, or borrow. Tax is going to play a centre stage in terms of how governments see how they feel that debt problem and address it. Third and finally, what does it mean for the financial sector? There are different moving parts here where tax plays a role in terms of the centres themselves, in terms of the instruments, and in terms of the participants. For financial centres to really thrive, they need to have deep and liquid markets. They need to have a clear regulatory environment, and they need to be the place that clients want to do business in. And that depends on the ecosystem, and within that, it's not only predictability, but tax plays a role. Indeed, Dubai's attraction as a financial centre is the fact that it is a good place to do business because of its low tax regime. So tax plays a role. In terms of the instruments, the Financial Stability Board is at the forefront globally. They look at consistency and coherent approach, whether in terms of regulation or looking at the end economic use of whatever it is that they're examining at the time. So their emphasis is very much on regulation. So the way tax comes in is almost secondary to that regulatory and that supervisory approach. But it's likely to come more under the microscope. Almost half of global assets now are in the shadow banking sector. They're in the shadows not only because of regulation, but also because of tax. Tax also plays a role in influencing the capital structure of banks and the risk-taking of firms and institutions. So tax comes more to the fore. And what about the individuals themselves? Look, there's many different ways of looking at this, but at the end, individuals look at it from their own perspective. It's about controlling the controllables and needing to have your own financial situation under control. And individuals very much look at this from a competitive aspect. If they can, they will move their money to a place where it's taxed least. Let's leave it there maybe. Obviously we can talk about crypto in the overall debate and everything, but putting it together, the 3 takeaways are, first, the macro picture. We're seeing a very different global environment, but tax is now a policy instrument. Second, in terms of tax, the principles of taxation very much are changing, evolving. tax is clearly there to grab revenues, but is also there as an interventionist as well as an incentive instrument. And third and finally, in terms of financial centres, maybe the message is that if the less mobile areas are taxed, capital will move to where it can easily move to, and that's the low tax regimes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lyons. That's interesting. I wonder whether capital will really move, because maybe security, culture is also relevant in that respect. But thank you for that provocative statement. Ms. Knight, what about your thoughts on the future?
Well, thank you very much indeed. I don't know whether the microphone's working. Yes, I think it is, so that's good. So my name's Angela Knight, and as Ed and others have said, I think it's in your handout for today. At one point, I chaired the Office of Tax Simplification. Now, the Office of Tax Simplification is an oxymoron. The words tax and simplification don't actually sit in the same planet, let alone in one office. And as Edward has said, the ability to anybody to think that tax is going to get simple, I would say to them, go and lie down in a darkened room until you've got over it. But what I do now is a number of non-executive director roles. I chair Pool Re, which is the reinsurer in this country that stands behind the insurers for terrorist damage. Very localized, has 13 billion, but is very much focused here in this country. I also sit on the board of a small private bank, again, very localized here. My two international roles are the ones that I think are relevant for this conference, though. One is an American board, which is the largest global debt management company, and the other is I chair the International Financial Regulator in Kazakhstan. Two very different parts of the world. Now, as far as my American board and what I see of the times when I go to America, this whole piece of politics, of tax, which has already been put together, and indeed politics, tax, economy, what you can do, what you can't do, inextricably linked. The whole political situation in America has changed, irrespective of whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, or whether you voted for Trump, or whether you think he's barking. What has happened is a move which is strongly supported, which is America looking after America. And the tariff situation will at some point settle down into some form of a solidified set of requirements that those who import into America are going to have to abide by. And the knockback on ourselves in this country and in Europe will be strong. It'll be strong in the obvious way, in which some of those things which we've exported in the past we're not going to be able to export. It's going to be strong in another way, and that is that we will not be prepared, or maybe I should put it a different way, that our governments will not be prepared to allow cheap imports into Europe in a way that destroys what's left of our industry. Steel is the obvious example. If we cannot export steel to the US, then will we allow the importing of steel from China into Europe? And the answer is, under current requirements, no. And that then brings with it another set of taxation questions, which we'll have to answer. And in amongst all this is that other global political shift that has been caused by Trump. And that is, what is America prepared to continue to finance, and what is it not prepared to continue to finance? And again, from my time in America and my American board, there is widespread view that they have, in some form, supported Europe too long. And that removal of that support, most noticeably via NATO, requires European countries to increase their own expenditure when those very European current countries are over-indebted. They can do very little at the moment in the way of being able to adjust or change what it is that they do without causing huge internal problems. And that requirement to pay more into a particular area of defense at a time when they find it difficult to pull back from social security or the like, equals taxation is going to go up, whether it is small changes to the taxation system or large changes to the taxation system. It will certainly make that taxation system more complicated. And we will strongly see it here, and will strongly see it in Europe as well. And I see no change from that, because what I do see is regionalization taking place. The idea of global standards, certainly in taxation, but in other areas, as now is on the wane. So I hop next to Kazakhstan, completely the other end of the world, as well as a very different culture and attitude as well. A country that has only been out of the Soviet Union for 20 plus years. Large in area, small in population, high in education, and is building a country effectively from scratch out of the oil and gas revenues it gets, which it pumps out of the Caspian Sea. Now, I have been there 6 years. The currency is tenge. So far, I've never seen one. And the reason I haven't seen one is when I arrived, you paid by card. Now you pay entirely on the phone. The whole infrastructure of the country has been built on new systems, on new digital, using the modern possible techniques. AI is coming into regulation. Stable coins are being authorized. The crypto city is going to start to be built. Now, the International Financial Center sits in Astana, the capital, and as Gerard has commented already on tax havens, yes, there is effectively an almost zero tax regime there. It is sucking in capital from all across the world, not just for that, but because there are good, hard goods to be brought out of Kazakhstan, not just oil, not just wheat, but also uranium and rare earths, all of which we need. And therefore, as we are looking at what we are doing here in this country and in Europe, moving fast, which we've never done, needs to be thought about. If we continue on the sclerotic way in which we kind of move our own barriers, then we will just not just grow slowly, but we'll lose more and more of the business. If we stick with our existing way of taxation, then we will see the big multinationals move to countries where they may not have the stability that they see here, but they have far greater opportunities. So looking at this topic, which is huge, I think I will just, in accordance with my three panelists, just confirm exactly what they've said. Don't look for tomorrow as being the same as yesterday. We have shifted very much indeed. Don't look for globalization. At the very best, we can get regionalization, and let's make sure we get there. Don't expect anything to remain the same. Regulation will change, tax will change, and if we don't get into AI and Gen AI, we'll see even more go, and arguing the toss about how we regulate it for the next 3 years is not the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Knight, for this call to action. I would, with such a high caliber panel here, I would like to invite you, if you have a question on any of the topics that were raised. This was quite a ride through nationalization of taxation, the importance of taxing immobile property, I also read the article by Larry Fink. I was surprised by the tone. Are there questions from the audience here? Maybe you can say the question, I will repeat it. So the effect of demography on tax and on economic growth. Does the younger
The more you'll
Yes.
grow, the older your country, the less you'll grow.
Great question. It allows me to repeat something which I've got into trouble in the press for saying before, which is, you should be taxing us boomers. My generation basically have done extremely well out of everything for the last 50, 60 years. And now we find ourselves taxed less heavily than the working population. And that is a very foolish policy in tax terms and should be reversed. And it's a disgrace that my children pay a higher tax rate than I do.
Well, demographics clearly is important, as has been mentioned, but it does vary considerably across the globe. Demographics. Okay, Western Europe is an aging population. It has a large number of very wealthy older people, therefore the target audience to be taxed. Also, Western European countries have to face up to the immigration debate, and that's centre stage. Let's not go there because it's probably a different conversation in itself. But here in the UK, we've used immigration to address short-term economic needs without investing in the country. So it's complex, it's not just political. Trouble about immigration is that here in the UK, we don't really discuss it enough. So when it is discussed, it tends to be discussed by the extremes. But immigration becomes central in the debate in Western Europe. But young populations really do exist. South Asia has a phenomenally young population. One of the interesting statistics is that if you take the average age of India, which is 27, basically it's 1 in 6 of the world population. So that means 1 in 12 people in the world is an Indian under the age of 27. South Asia has an incredibly young population. Africa has an incredibly young population. But if you look at Northeast Asia, it's China, South Korea, and Japan all have rapidly aging populations. So it's a very complex picture, and we tend to always assume the population is getting older, but it's not always the case. So, your point about taxation of where the wealth is, really, that's the issue in Western Europe.
Can I just ask you whether what that implies for how we should have the flow of goods, services, and division of labour amongst the world's economy? Because clearly, younger people are more suited to doing things than older people are, and vice versa, and that must carry implications.
Well, okay. I think it has a number of implications. First of all, in terms of demographics and tax, pension ages should definitely rise. But in France, if you suggest that, you tend not to get re-elected. But in terms of the flow, older people, if AI really does come to the fore, then we still have the ability to use the skill sets of older people, one would imagine. Whereas in the past, they became redundant, so to speak, after 65 or so. Younger people, would have more ability.
There is work which requires physical labour, which, just physically younger people will be better suited at. So this must carry implications for immigration and mobility, because you simply can't have Koreans all over the age of 60 trying to build houses and do what other labour-intensive jobs.
There's some very, very interesting other graphs which show that of the European countries, because of their immigration policies, only the UK and Germany are self-sustainable, and the other European countries are not in the sense of the aging population. The same articles also talk about the insulation of the US, i.e. the US does not actually need immigration, one of the few countries that doesn't. The desperation of China is there, and one sees that already in the Chinese engagement in Africa is as much about how does it support its population as any, because it is an aging population.
I think this is quite fascinating itself. In terms of...
You've sent us down a very different topic.
you want to attract skilled labour. You want skilled labour as opposed to unskilled labour. But also at the same time, you need to have your companies investing in upskilling your domestic labour force as well as investing in capital. if one looks at the data on investment in robotics, it's quite amazing. Italy is off the scale compared to Britain, because Italy's younger population has migrated. A lot of them have come here to the UK, whereas the UK always has that steady flow of people. Immigrants tend to be cheaper or skilled, or sometimes cheaper and skilled. And Britain actually has been incredibly good at integrating immigrants into the domestic labour force. China has, partly because of the ageing population, China is really taking the lead on AI. If one looks at the data on AI, there's the Stanford University and the Australian Institute. They're often seen as the global barometers. There's two countries that are out and above, way ahead is China and America. Then third and fourth is India and Britain, but some way back. But in terms of the financial sector, and also in terms of your ability to tax people, that China and America will really take the lead. And first mover advantage often means that others follow. And that will clearly have implications. You'll probably be able to have better information on everyone's assets, which makes everything taxable in that respect.
But then that's the art of the possible, because whilst it's common in some countries, or they don't feel it in some countries, that everything, you know, is known to the authorities. There's an element of that in France. Anybody here who's got a French bank account will know that. If I hop to Kazakhstan, where I said everything is digital and it's done in an it makes us look an extraordinarily old country and backward country, dare I say, huge centralized database. How much would we be prepared to allow our authorities to have access to everything in our lives? And that is a debate that we will have here strongly, and so will any democratic country. It's not one that you have in, shall I call them, semi-democratic countries. I don't wish to abuse anybody who may be from them here, but I think you understand the point that I make. And in there comes straight back into whether you do manage to tax in a world in which we all have our crypto coin wallets and the rest of it, how much you do manage to do it in a country like this compared with some of the new countries which don't have that same concern or aren't allowed to have that same concern.
Can I just interfere? Because the demographics question is fascinating, and I would have agreed with the panel a few years ago. I think demographics is no longer the big key. I think robotics and AI have changed the picture. So yes, somebody taking care of your elderly parent. In Japan, they already have robots. Robotics becomes much more important. If you go to the airport now, half the time there's a little robot cleaning things.
Great.
Then with AI, I mean, this is, dare I say it, a slightly aged panel. But we all continue working. Now, we continue working for a number of reasons, but using AI makes it so much easier. So I think we will need fewer people to have a productive economy. And therefore, hopefully, immigration becomes less of an issue, because right now it is the key issue that leads to populism, and understandably so. I also just wanted to agree with Angela on regionalization. I think that's happening, and I'm more positive about Europe, and I include the UK in Europe because we are part of Europe. I think what's happened is the UK and Europe have become closer together. We're never going to rejoin the EU, nor should we. But this being closer together and being in the defence space, there's 150 billion euros that the EU is raising. So it's not national governments, it's the EU, for defence. The UK, Germany, everybody is in there. And a huge amount is going on in terms of making sure that procurement works better. It's not going to happen overnight, but procurement works better. There's more cooperation between European countries. Just in the last 2 weeks, I've been in Denmark and in Brussels for talks about more cooperation in defence. This is happening, and Europe and the UK can take this chance, and maybe we can come out of our low growth issues also using demographics, which was the best question you could have asked.
Dear panelists, I think I would love to go on much longer, but we have to come to an end. I would like to thank the four of you very much for your contribution, for helping us here with your insight. Maybe, well, it's not cynic, or I don't mean to be cynic. Tax law will not decrease in importance. But maybe stability and the rule of law is also a possibility in a world which is, at least apparently right now, characterized by a lot of might. Maybe law is a positive factor. Thank you very much to all of you for helping us with your insights, and yeah, thank you.